right. Hello, greetings, and happy Labor Day to everyone. It may be a holiday, but, we are still lashed to this wheel of podcasts. It is me, Matt, Felix, and Amber joining you, but we have two very special scabs to join you on this wonderful holiday, starting with University of Washington historian Daniel Bessner, and then making our returning champion, the all-time Chapo leading guest episode appearance champion, Derek Davison. How's it going, gentlemen?
Really well.
Am I getting time and a half for this because it's a holiday or what?
No, absolutely not. This is the day we celebrate your bosses and entrepreneurs like ourselves.
Who have you been talking to, Derek? Who's putting ideas in your head?
Like Amazon, we are brief job listing on Labor Day. Like Amazon, we are hiring spies for our podcast network. Just please report back to us if you see anyone on social media or on your own podcast talking about, podcast unionization, podcast wealth redistribution, anything like that. We would like to hear from it. Come be a Pinkerton for Chapo. Happy Labor Day, everybody. Well, we got Daniel and Derek. We got you on today, and this is a perfect one. I've been champing at the bit since about Friday. I wanted to do an emergency pod, but consider this the emergency podcast session because, in my opinion, the single best bit of reporting, news, and comedy to yet come out of this 2020 election has finally dropped. I've been waiting on this one for a while. It comes courtesy of The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg, probably our favorite human being on this show. I think he really holds the record as someone who probably warms my heart the greatest out of anyone who we've ever talked to on this show. But this is a bit of bombshell, earth-shattering, and I'm surely election-changing news that Donald Trump does not give a fuck about our beautiful dead soldiers from World War I.
What?
And it goes from there. This warrants, we've got experts in our corner. We've got the full Chapo lineup here. Sans Virgil. I'm going to go through this whole piece, but just starting off the top with you, Derek and Daniel, as our foreign policy expert and historian. What do you make of the loser and sucker gate, as I'm calling it?
I think it pretty clearly reflects the reality that since the creation of the all-volunteer force in 1973, we've essentially established a janissary class of soldiers that are totally disconnected in any way, shape, or form from our nation's elite. From Trump to Samantha Power, right? So there's generations of soldiers who essentially are poor from the South or West or grew up literally outside of a military base, and they're totally disconnected from American society, which is why someone like Trump would say something like this. He doesn't even know, it doesn't even enter his mind. He doesn't know any soldiers or things like that. And it's also, as you guys say all the time, it doesn't make a difference at all. It's just going to totally have absolutely no effect, but it is really funny.
I was stunned for a man like Donald Trump who has always put others before himself and held, workers and the downtrodden in such respect. For him to say these things, it shatters my worldview. I don't know how to rebuild and try to make sense of things at this point.
I think that we're missing a lot of context here. I've been to diners in the Midwest. I've gotten beaten up in a lot of diners because I'm going out to patrons and bothering them and asking them if they thought the Democratic Party lost them when they got rid of Tom Daschle. I'm eating people's fries. I'm generally behaving and imitating the voice of John Leguizamo in the past.
I like to do my police, cruising cream, playing 3-car money on these crazy streets, straight hustler. I'm all a scam man, I'm in it, so low to the flow, pick the pocket on a midget.
Part of an assignment that I have for The Atlantic. But the thing is, when you talk to these Midwestern voters, people who've had their fingers trapped in Chinese finger traps, people who are stuck in giant tires because their hero is the Michelin Man, real Americans, not hoity-toity media consumers, they support what Donald Trump has said about this because they, like him, think the Austrians should have stewardship of the Balkans. That was, if you remember, when he came down the escalator, he was coming out against the Black Hand. He was saying that Austrians have a blood right to rule over there. And I'm really amazed by people not catching on to that.
damn it, I had a whole bit about this, and Felix beat me to it, and he did it better. But I just really wanted someone to explain to him in the helicopter, well, okay, so there was this small group of Serbian nationalists, and it's very important. It set off a whole thing. This one weird, they were all like 19 and insane incels, by the way, and it was a whole world war because of that. It is a fascinating thing to start with World War I, the most stupid, incomprehensible, burn after reading war you could possibly imagine.
Well, that's why he was baffled, because he doesn't have the ideological.
It's a baffling war.
He doesn't have any ideological filter, because Trump really is proof that the powerful, they don't believe any of this shit. They know the world is like we see it. It's an abattoir of exploitation, and they just think that that's good because they're the ones doing the exploiting. That's why, as Amber points out, Financial Times, which is for the ruling class, is pretty unvarnished and relatively like Marxist in its analysis, because they're talking to each other. And
Material
Trump,
world.
all Trump has is he doesn't have the part of the brain to lie to the fucking rubes, which is what the rest of them have beaten into them at birth, and that has slowly been dissolved by dang Cheeto dust and syphilis spider sheets by now. So he's just saying this, and I think my favorite part of it is that he said it in front of John Kelly, apparently.
Yep. Oh,
Whose son died in Iraq. Because like a guy in that position, as they're saying, like the ruling class is totally detached from the military, except for guys who went through the military to get into power. And that means those guys actually believe this shit to some degree, because if they didn't, they wouldn't have joined the military. They would have done something that would have given them like more money and more direct power earlier than like grinding up through the ranks, in the army or something, or the Marines. So Kelly believes this shit. And so he thinks his son died for a reason. And here's the guy he fought on behalf of, representing the class of people that he fought on behalf of and is now a minion of, telling him to his face, your kid is a fucking loser and an idiot and a sucker because this is all fake.
I will say,
fascinating, though, because it took him a while to initially, with the I don't get it, what's in it for them comments. He was like, oh, he must have been speaking to the heroism and the selflessness and the altruism. It's like, so even the idea, like, first of all, it took him so long to be like, I think he might not respect what my son did. Like, that just proves that, like, an article like this won't be taken. It's not like the troops are going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's not an indictment of intelligence or anything. It's just that people want to believe the people they like would like them. That's just human nature.
On the World War I issue, Amber, which you brought up, I would love to do a poll of the people who read this article and got really mad at it and see how many of them still think he was talking about World War II.
Yes, Derek.
Yes.
I had the exact same thing when I first saw this headline. It was like Trump refused to visit the U.S. military cemetery in France. I was immediately thinking it was like the Normandy Beaches one, and I was like, ooh, yikes! Like even for Trump, that's a bit far. And then as soon as I found out it was like World War I was like, oh fuck it, this is funny as hell because everyone, I guarantee you're exactly right. Almost everyone who's mad at this is just thinking about World War II, and what I like about this, like we're gonna read the piece because like the details in it are funnier than anything that you like. It's like pure duck soup. It's pure Marx Brothers. But like the larger meta thing that's funny is that like if you're president, like the barest minimum thing you have to do of our civic norms that must be observed is loving and respecting our honored fallen dead. Our soldiers who died in wars for fighting for our freedom, or whoever's freedom World War I was a consequence
or
of.
Bosnian national self-determination.
I really pray for you if you don't see the honor in fighting the war of cousins and uncles.
So,
nephew against uncle, cousin against cousin, family friend against family friend. The most important war in human history.
But what I love so much about this story is that this is like I feel like so many people have been waiting for something like this of such a primal violation of our kind of civic religion and codes of behavior for our leaders to so violently just stick his fucking finger in it and just fucking stumble into the country club like Rodney Dangerfield and Caddyshack and just start asking people's wives if they've ever made $16 the hard way, except it's a war widow instead of a golf person, you know? And like I saw this story and I just want to say I immediately thought, this is it. There is simply no way the Republican Party or Donald Trump supporters or Fox News can possibly get out of this. There's no way, for instance, they'll just say this is a hoax and move on. Or just, even better, just say, actually, Joe Biden said that, and then everyone will forget about it by a day later.
Or more likely say, what's the Atlantic? Jeffrey who?
Well, I mean,
Fox News trashed their own reporter. They spent a whole day basically like tossing their own reporter under the bus when she confirmed some of this stuff. Well, it was amazing.
I mean, the Goldberg's thing does rely on anonymous sources, and you can sort of read through the lines guessing who those anonymous sources are. But then, like, Fox's debunking of those anonymous sources relied on their own anonymous sources. And it's very clear, like, what Jeffrey Goldberg in The Atlantic is doing here with, like, the timing of this is that, you know, like, this is supposed to be, like, if not an October surprise, then, like, a large bullet loaded in the chamber aimed at, like, you know, getting him out of the White House. That's not to say I don't believe every single word of what's essentially being alleged here, because even outside of these new revelations, there is already so much on the record with Trump, particularly what he said about John McCain and George H.W. Bush's military careers. If you think it's unlikely that he would say the things alleged here, then, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. But it's Jeffrey Goldberg's involvement in this that adds just another layer of meta comedy, because, you know, he is, you know, so puffed up on himself about, like, you know, Donald Trump simply doesn't understand what it's like to serve a nation or volunteer to serve a foreign nation that you're not a member of as well, at least as far as Jeffrey Goldberg is concerned. But I mean, like,
where's the parade for the prison guards?
But I mean,
just like I love the fact though that he has been reduced to a page 6 columnist. Like, that undignified fucking position is suited to him.
It's hot
like,
goss.
No one believes him. It comes off like fucking goss. It's probably true, or at least largely true, and no one fucking cares because no one respects you, and they don't think any of this matters because it doesn't.
And Amber, I think that's an amazing point. That's something I thought about a lot. How the liberal thing about Trump is often like, let's not stoop to his level. Let's not go low like he goes low. Let's go high. Let's be better than him. But you can't help but play the meta of the champion. And the meta is acting like a gossipy bitch. How do you take down the media bitch? You act like Liz Smith. Not the political consultant, but the columnist.
Yes.
That's what, like Maggie Haberman has been a reporter for what, like 20, 30 years? Like a fucking long time. And she's written some huge stories. She's broken some huge things. But just because of what the meta is now, because of who the president is, all her stories are like, you won't believe what Hope Hicks said about fucking Craig Shue.
But they don't have the chops of a Liz Smith. They don't have the chops of a page 6 writer.
But just to the author of the story before I start reading it, Jeffrey Goldberg, like, it just the irony here is also really funny, because is there anyone who genuinely views the U.S. military and the people who serve in it as bigger suckers than Jeffrey Goldberg, considering his career in war reporting and, let's just say, intelligence massaging? Because, I mean, like, he was happy to send thousands to their deaths in the war in Iraq based on his own erroneous reporting. And does he tell himself that the people who believed him aren't suckers, or that he isn't a sucker? I mean, how does he square that in his head?
Well, I mean, this was the deal, I think, that was made when the military went, like, volunteer in the 70s. It was that the elites would be able to basically trade, like, their sort of genuflection to the troops who they don't really give a shit about in favor of not having to really serve in the military at all, which is, you know, throughout most of American history, the elite actually did in some sense serve, if not meaningfully, it served in the military. And so what's so interesting about Trump is he's just tearing the mask off that in every way, shape, or form. So it leads it up to like liberal scolds who, like you said, throughout all of their actual actions have demonstrated they couldn't give less of a shit about the people who actually go and fight America's wars to then scold him. And it's just totally ridiculous and just another indication that sort of the norms of this era are coming to an end, but the new world has yet to be born.
So this is my question here too. When we saw that shift, away from the draft with sort of popular opinion, I mean, broadly, the working class was opposed to Vietnam. You were more likely to support it if you had gone to college. It feels very short-sighted, and I kind of wanted to know, because it's like, well, obviously, if you make it a volunteer army, the only people who are going to volunteer are going to be the people who have to or just have no other option, and they could be used as cannon fodder. And in some ways, one of the major kind of features of like anti-Vietnam sort of propaganda was that these were nice middle-class boys who, in maybe a different era, either wouldn't have been in the military, or if they were like upper middle class, they would have been just like the guys having tea in the tent with the opposing generals. But obviously in like jungle guerrilla warfare, they don't fight like that. They don't have that kind of a war tradition.
Right.
So I guess I'm curious about like how that transition happened.
So it's actually pretty interesting. Initially, a lot of generals are pretty much against the all-volunteer force for that very reason. They're worried that, you're actually, who the fuck would volunteer for it? But it turns out that it was the best thing they ever did, because in the medium and long term, what it essentially did was, even after sort of the church commissions and the post-Vietnam investigations, it allowed the American military, American policymakers to essentially do whatever the fuck they wanted with the military, because no one was essentially looking over their shoulders, right? You don't have the middle class actually fighting Vietnam. And what people don't forget when they talk about the success of the anti-Vietnam War protests, that's right to a degree, but really what their most immediate success is that they pushed the war from a ground war to a bombing war, right? You get the bombing of the North, you get the bombing of Cambodia and Laos as a result of these sorts of protests. So there's a bunch of precursors right before the all-volunteer force, which actually suggested that if you're able to remove effectively the bourgeoisie from war fighting, then the American military, the American empire, will be able to do essentially what it wants. And just one quick thing, if you actually go back to the debates, the sort of trade was that if you served in the military, you'd get socialist benefits. There's a really good book called The Rise of the Military Welfare State.
Yes, that's an amazing book.
Yeah, it's an amazing book, which so essentially shows exactly how that went. But I think it was the best move the American military, the American empire ever made. It gave them basically a force that they could do whatever the fuck they want with, and the bourgeoisie didn't care.
Yeah, it does, though, seem like a pretty short-sighted move on the anti-war movement.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the problem. I mean, the anti-war movement's a very complicated phenomenon. I mean, the big problem was when they stopped being as vicious when the war switched to bombing. That was a big problem.
Or chemicals.
And then once the draft was suspended, it pretty much tailed off after that completely.
Exactly.
All right. Well, like I said, this Jeffrey Goldberg piece is too good not to dive into the details of. So I'm just gonna, with your guys' assistance, I'm gonna go through this. Like I said, this sure to change plenty of votes and shift the scale and balance of powers in this country literally overnight to the power of the Fourth Estate. Jeffrey Goldberg, writing in The Atlantic, beginning. When President Donald Trump canceled a visit to the American cemetery near Paris in 2018, he blamed rain for the last-minute decision, saying the helicopter couldn't fly and that the Secret Service wouldn't drive him there. Neither claim was true. Okay.
That's so cool. That's like an excuse Felix would make up when he slept in. Didn't make the pod on time.
According to several unnamed sources.
A power line crashed in my window, and I opened up my toilet today, and a bird flew out and attacked me. It's actually amazing that I'm alive.
According to several unnamed sources, Trump could not visit our honored war dead because, quote, his alarm clock didn't go off, and then his other alarm clock was broken. Neither claim was true, as no one uses alarm clocks anymore, as their phone essentially has removed the need for such a device. I do like it, though. He said the helicopter couldn't fly in rain. I mean, perhaps he was just going to take an F-35 to the cemetery and it literally couldn't fly.
Fair.
Fair enough. But he goes here, continuing, it says here, Trump rejected the idea of the visit. Trump rejected the idea of the visit because he feared his hair would become disheveled in the rain and because he did not believe it important to honor American war dead, according to 4 people with firsthand knowledge of the discussion that day. In a conversation...
Girl, spill that tea. That is so fucking gossipy.
In a conversation with senior staff members on the morning of the scheduled visit, Trump said, quote, "Why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers." In a separate conversation on the same trip,
Couldn't be me.
in a separate conversation on the same trip, Trump referred to the more than 1,800 Marines who lost their lives at Belleau Wood as suckers for getting killed. Belleau Wood is a consequential battle in American history, and the ground on which it was fought is venerated by the Marine Corps. America and its allies stopped the German advance toward Paris there in the spring of 1918. But Trump, on that same trip, asked aides, who were the good guys in this war? He also said that he didn't understand why the United States would intervene on the side of the Allies. Okay, I gotta say, when I read this,
It's a good question.
who were the good guys in that war? Speaking of World War I, is literally the only sane question to ask about that conflict, and the
Gavrilo Princip.
and the answer is there were none. The only the bad guys were the officer corps of every one of the militaries engaged in that fucking war. But like
Arranged.
it's just they think about it like it was World War II. But like if the Allies didn't, if American Marines didn't stop the Kaiser's advance on Paris, like what, like a different set of empires would have come out holding the cards on that, or maybe like the Nazis
World
never
War II would have been avoided.
yeah.
It wasn't something you could compare to like an imperial fascism at all. It was all just it was such a clusterfuck. And I think people don't understand that like there was a massive in the American socialist movement a refusal to serve during World War I, and during World War II there was some holdover for quite a while because they were like, this is just another situation where we're just throwing a bunch of bodies at a conflict that has nothing to do with us. And then eventually, like, the Communist Party changed their mind, and they're like, oh, no, this is actually a pretty big problem. We should get involved in this one.
Yeah.
But their initial skepticism of it was very well founded because World War I was such a bullshit fucking... What even was that stupid war?
Well,
it was
specifically
incredibly...
Trump's concern where he's like, why did we do it? I mean, that's not him being craven. That's just him not knowing his stupid history. He should read the fucking minutes of the Nye Committee, and he'd know we went into World War I to make sure that J.P. Morgan didn't lose all the money he lent the Allies. And if someone explained that to him,
He would
get it. He'd be
understand
like,
that.
oh, smart move. Good move,
Yeah.
Wilson.
Yeah, I mean,
Look, imagine like if you went to a restaurant today and you tried to get French onion soup and all they had was like a big bowl of sauerkraut. I mean, come on. Like, this is
Not a world I wanna live
existential
in.
stuff, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and needless to say, it was World War I that destroyed both American and European socialism to some degree. I mean, Debs was arrested. Wilson arrested Debs. He opened all the mails. He used it to infiltrate the socialists and the communists. That's just in the United States. And then in Germany, it fucking split the Socialist Party. So you get the USPD and the SPD arguing over the war, which effectively leads to years and years of struggle, in some real sense culminating in Hitler. So is, in my opinion, World War I's the worst thing to happen to socialism worldwide.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's interesting to read some of the old Rosa Luxemburg speeches.
Very against the
she's
war.
talking about the war, and she's like, no, this will end badly. So they killed her and threw her in a canal.
Yeah, I mean, you have some really extreme elements of the left at the time thinking, it's sort of accelerationists, arguing that when they met on the battlefield, the working classes would unite against the aristocracy. Unfortunately, that didn't
Yes.
happen.
This is also a pattern you see with kind of every stripe of revolutionary. They always think the revolution is just around the corner. Look how much is going on. We must be on the precipice of it. It's like, no, it's about to get way worse.
Do you think after they killed Archduke Ferdinand, some guy in England was like, they've fucked around and found out. I'm gonna post my favorite leather helmeted football mascot as a symbol of the coming revolution.
Yeah, and just to very briefly, like all those Italian guys who founded the fascist party were actually veterans of the Austro-Italian Front, which was like the most vicious front in World War I's history. And so there's a lot of arguments historians have made, literally connecting the sort of aesthetic of fascism to the experience of this Austro-Italian Front. So it was just horrible in every way, shape, or form.
Well, if we're speaking about other fascist accounts of World War I, my favorite would have to be Celine, an author who I do not approve of. But if you read the first two chapters about his experience in World War I, which are among the most, I mean, if you read nothing else, just read those first two chapters. And what's so clear in them is that for the people fighting the war, like your enemy was the officer class and military police of your own side, because they liked nothing better than to execute their own soldiers for like desertion or cowardice or shit like that. They were just always looking to line some poor schmuck up against the wall and fucking pop goes the weasel, as Duck Soup says. Going on here, it says here, the Trump's understanding of concepts such as patriotism, service, and sacrifice has interested me since he expressed contempt for the war record of the late Senator John McCain, who spent more than 5 years as a prisoner of the North Vietnamese. He's not a hero, Trump said in 2015 while running for the Republican nomination for the president. I like people who weren't captured. I mean, we all know that's a classic Trump cut. I like the troops who weren't captured.
Which, hey, it's like he was able at that point to at least put out enough bullshit to say that he liked some of the troops, the ones who didn't get captured, who are less losers than the ones who got captured, who are less losers than the ones who died. They're the biggest losers.
I mean, that was such an incredible moment. It seems like it happened now like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it was such an incredible moment that he said that and didn't suffer anything for it in a Republican primary.
Everyone
it
thought
was just such an
over
amazing... Right.
Yeah. That's all democratic.
In some ways, it speaks to the idea that actually the Republican Party is more democratic in the small D sense. Well, they're more big D in the D sense, but they have more sort of a populist bent at this point, whether they like it or not. They have more than the Democratic Party, certainly, where they're like, no, we don't want this person that everyone likes. Whereas the Republican is like, no, we don't want this person everyone likes. And everyone's like, yeah, fuck you. We don't care.
There's also this sort of weird pathology amongst the elite bourgeoisie, who are essentially mostly liberal in this country, about having not served in the military. So I think they're particularly sensitive to that chart. I mean, I'm sure we all went to, we all know these groups. It's just that and I think that's affected, been really important since the 1960s, where there's all this nervousness and anxiety about getting accused about not using martial sacrifice for your country. That's reflected in these beliefs that are just totally wrong.
Daniel, that's a really good, that's something I think about a lot, because when you think about the commanding heights of sort of for lack of a better term, like the liberal elite or like the liberal intelligentsia or media or political class, it's like they all form their identities coming out of the 60s for the most part, and being very proud of taking part in both the civil rights movement but also the anti-Vietnam War movement. And then, they love to tell themselves that, we ended a war. We marched and we ended the Vietnam War. We resisted the draft and shit like that. And then, as the country takes a more right-wing turn and with Carter and then Reagan and the Reagan era, it just seems like they've always been trying to atone for that in some way. They would never come out and just say oh, actually the Vietnam War was good, but 9/11 and the war on terror just gave them their opportunity to sort of atone for insulting the military, or they believing in this idea that we spit on the troops and they came home, or we lost the war on the home front, and we served our fighting men so badly by disrespecting their valor or their sacrifice, even in a war that we didn't agree with. And they all really overcompensated for that when it came time for the war on terror and Iraq and Afghanistan, and they wanted to make doubly sure that hey, we may have opposed wars in the past, but we're different now. We're reasonable.
But it's a generation later, so they're doing it not only not the people participating it's someone else's sons.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I think that's right. And just one quick thing, there's a book called The Spitting Image, that the idea that people spit on returning Vietnam troops is not actually
Yeah,
true.
it's hokum.
Right.
It's
It was the knockout game of its day.
right.
I don't know.
That
I'm
was-
pretty sure some guys got knocked out and it got filmed. I don't think anyone ever got spit on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a right wing like POW, KIA sort of conspiracy theory. But Will, just to briefly answer your point, no, I think that's exactly right. You actually see sort of a transformation, I think, in American masculinity. Like you have all these bankers in the 80s, like using this like hyper militaristic, hyper violent language. I think because there's like a libidinal anxiety about having not served in the military, which comes to fruition during 9/11, where they wind up sending, like Amber said, other people's children to die. I mean, you see the same shit amongst like Samantha Power, Susan Rice, all these people willing to send other people's children to save other people's babies. You know, it's a classic liberal way to approach war.
Going on here, it says Trump remained fixated on McCain, one of the few prominent Republicans to continue criticizing him after he won the nomination. When McCain died in August 2018, Trump told his senior staff, according to 3 sources with direct knowledge of the event, "We're not going to support that loser's funeral." And he became furious, according to witnesses, when he saw flags lowered to half staff. What the fuck are we doing that for? Guy was a fucking loser, the president told him. He's doing the Hoffa thing, man.
It's so cool.
He says,
Also, he was a loser. He wanted to be president so badly, and he lost.
Yeah, and
That's
Trump
not his
barely
fault. He was
tried.
from Arizona. No, I mean, McCain is objectively a loser. Like, all that legacy, everyone in that family tree was an admiral. Like, they're fucking, you trace them back to the fucking Neolithic era. Their guy was he probably, like, built a fucking raft out of woolly mammoth pelts. And, you know, sank that ship, too. Just, and, like, American aristocracy. And,
I like Paleolithic men that don't sink their mammoth rafts.
Yeah. And then, what is his legacy? 2 failed runs for presidency. The guy who started a robocall that his adopted daughter was an illegitimate black child that he had. He campaigns for him, sells his soul for him. And his legacy, his progeny, 1 son no one ever fucking hears about or gives a shit about, and a daughter that everyone hates.
Everyone on Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, the heel of the view.
She is
Yeah.
like
Legacy.
no one. I
Literally-
don't think anyone likes her, and she's on there to draw animus from the audience, and that they get a pleasure out of that. She's
Michael
she's
Ian
like
Black.
a wrestling heel.
The only one.
Yeah.
The only like tardy right wing hysteric blonde that doesn't even have a gay sycophant.
Yeah, not a single one.
Well, I mean,
he has
unless
one.
you
He has
count-
one, Amber.
Well, yeah, one that I can think of.
Yeah, that's true. But and the person who made her own position for his campaign as a blogger without asking the campaign, and then got fired from a job she invented for herself.
Yeah,
When
I mean,
they
just
found
stellar.
out she had done it.
just
Yeah.
stellar. He definitely raised a real Frederick the Great there.
Not even a meadow. Janice.
Yeah.
Janice was more successul, I think.
Yeah, it's true.
She would not have been able to kill Richie Aprile, I guarantee
Yeah,
you.
Janice
No, yeah.
survived at the end.
She would have just accused Richie Aprile of anti-Semitism. Come on. What the fuck are you talking about, Janice? No one's giving more money to Israel than me and my brother.
So it says here, Trump's understanding of heroism has not evolved since he became president. According to sources with knowledge of the president's views, he seems to genuinely not understand why Americans treat former prisoners of war with respect, nor does he understand why pilots who are shot down in combat are honored by the military. On at least 2 occasions since becoming president, according to 3 sources, Trump referred to former President George H.W. Bush as a loser for being shot down by the Japanese as a Navy pilot in World War II. Bush escaped capture, but 8 other men shot down during the same mission were caught, tortured, and executed by Japanese soldiers. Felix,
So
you talked about this earlier, though. But George H.W. Bush was alive, but incredibly diminished when these comments first surfaces. Like, if Trump could not have called George H.W. Bush a loser for getting shot down in like the 70s or 80s.
In the 70s, like, could you imagine what would have happened? Like, George H.W. would have been like, in his because HW's public image was that he was like a nice nerd. Like, watch this 60 Minutes interview that's on YouTube where it's like so clearly set up by Bush's people where they're like, "Are you too nice to be president?" And it's like, yeah, that's his problem. That's it. That's his problem. What would have happened if that happened in, say, 78? Well, first, Ivana would have had a car accident, I think.
Yeah.
A very tragic car accident where her brakes didn't work. Suddenly, OSHA, every housing regulatory body, they start having problems with the Trump empire. Then Donald gets caught with a kilo of coke that just wound up in his desk. And he goes to prison. That would have been, he would have wiped his bloodline off the fucking map. It would have been over. But Bush, when he was just like wheeling around, grabbing women's asses, he didn't notice. I mean, the story about Bush on the plane is interesting. He did get shot down and he did escape, but the account of the story changed a lot too.
Yeah, this is what I was gonna say. Like, there are lingering questions about whether he stayed, because he was the pilot of the plane, and there are lingering questions about whether he hung around long enough to give his crewmates time to bail out, or if he ditched them.
Yeah, it's not like LBJ, where LBJ completely made up what happened to him, which is awesome.
I think the only guy, whoever gave him any shit for that, whoever crossed that line with Bush, I think was Bob Dole. I think Bob Dole made some backhand cracks a few times while campaigning against him. That maybe he let those guys die. Unless that's an SNL sketch I'm remembering. But I could believe him having done that because Dole
what happened to
was
Bob.
a fucking pimp.
Look what happened to Bob Dole. His HW shot the erectile dysfunction gun from the CIA. It's like, yeah, no, you didn't fuck with that guy. But yeah, no, I mean, I do think generally though, like World War II, nah, like, yeah, I get if you're gonna have military commendations for this bullshit, like, yeah, the guys who got shut down in World War II, but now it's like having a ceremony for the Harlem Globetrotters if they got injured during a game. You're in a fucking F-18 now when you get shot down. You are a loser. You fucked up in some way.
Yeah, those things are. I mean, unless it rains and they just melt, they're not supposed to be shoot downable by what? Whose Air Force is going to be competitive with ours?
Yeah. What do? Swear a grudge against pigeons for the rest of your life?
So it says here, well, when lashing out at critics, Trump often reaches for illogical and corrosive insults, and members of the Bush family have publicly opposed him. But his cynicism about service and heroism extends even to the World War I dead buried outside Paris, people who were killed more than a quarter of a century before he was born. Trump finds the notion of military service difficult to understand, and the idea of volunteering to serve especially incomprehensible. In parentheses, Goldberg includes here, the president did not serve in the military. He received a medical deferment from the draft during the Vietnam War because of the alleged presence of bone spurs in his feet. In the 1990s, Trump said his efforts to avoid contracting sexually transmitted diseases constituted, quote, his personal Vietnam. Why does he make me like him? Why does he do this?
That's a great joke. Yeah.
Well, what I think is interesting about this is, like, Goldberg, not so subtly, is like, oh, Trump doesn't understand military service because he doesn't understand altruism. But in Goldberg's own account of when he served, it's straight up, he tells you, oh, I was a nerdy fat kid who couldn't get laid, so I had to go and feel power over somebody.
Right, yeah.
That's not why everyone does it, but, like, Jesus Christ, do we think it's all
Jeffrey
here?
Goldberg's version of serving in a military was like when Dick Cheney hunted those pheasants whose wings were cut. Like, Jeffrey Goldberg served by beating up guys who were already captured and disarmed. Like,
it must have been the
lowest difficulty level there on purpose.
It must have been a very personal war for him to be fighting guys who were on hunger strike.
Yeah.
But because Goldberg's acting like, yeah, the sacrifice, joining the military is an act of sacrifice for others. But, I mean, you can think of it that way, but I don't think if you're at the top, you usually do. You either think it's for losers, or if you want to do it, it's because your fear of death is overwhelmed by your desire to kill. And Trump, for all of his faults, is literally too cowardly to be, like, actively, like, violent that way. So it's like, no, that's good. I would rather just pile up my Croesus-like wealth and gaudy, extravagant life. I don't need to shoot somebody.
And it's the same like extension to his, like, not necessarily anti-war, but like conflict avoidant foreign policy. He's a real estate guy.
Yeah.
He can't, what if he wants to build a golf course there? He doesn't want to, because if he gets in too big, he could lose, and he doesn't want to put himself in a position where he could lose.
Yeah, fatalities from like airstrikes and drone strikes have risen during Trump, but anytime there's a threat, everyone thinks there will be like a massive troop buildup, like we're going to send a bunch of guys into a place. It never happens because even that scares him.
Yeah, but
he's fine with signing a piece of paper and 10 times as many fucking civilians die. But
which is why Obama is responsible because people will point to the rise in like drone strikes and civilian deaths under Trump as proof of you guys were mad at Obama and look, Trump's even worse, and you say he's anti-war. No, Obama built for him a perfect push button military machine that was totally technological and removed any political consequence for doing like maintaining the order, like mowing the lawn or whatever.
Exactly.
Like and that means that a guy like Trump, oh yeah, I'll just keep pressing this button. You tell me there's a bad guy, I'll go bing bong, and then he doesn't think for a second. He doesn't think for a second about how many people are going to die because there will never be a political consequence for those people dying because they're not Americans.
Yeah, and I think that's by design.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, it's just to the degree to which like any like major like ground troops oriented like remember how terrified everyone was after the assassination about Iran? It was like, uh-oh. And I was like, I don't know. Let's wait it out. And it kind of went, ugh, because he likes to rattle the saber, but he's not a big fan of sabers.
Well, the thing is it would have required Iran to an escalation would have required an escalation on the half of Iran. And the thing is, that would have required them to act like us. And no other country on earth gets to act like us. They can't afford to act like us. And so they can't, even if they want to. They are constrained from doing this insane shit we do. So we cannot like build up a symmetrical escalation.
All right. Well, now here we get into the John Kelly story.
Hell yeah.
This was just like
fuck that
again,
guy.
This is pure. This is
I
pure
hope a
Marx
single
Brothers.
tear rolled down his face like Iron Eyes Cody when he heard that shit.
So he says here, on Memorial Day 2017, Trump visited Arlington National Cemetery, a short drive from the White House. He was accompanied on this visit by John Kelly, who was then the Secretary of Homeland Security and who would, a short time later, be named White House Chief of Staff. The two men were set to visit Section 60, the 14-acre area of the cemetery that is the burial ground for those killed in America's most recent wars. Kelly's son, Robert, is buried in Section 60. A first lieutenant in the Marine Corps, Robert Kelly was killed in 2010 in Afghanistan. He was 29. Trump was meant on this visit to join Kelly in paying respects to his son's grave and to comfort the families of other fallen service members. But according to sources with knowledge of the visit, Trump, while standing by Robert Kelly's grave, turned directly to his father and said, "I don't get it. What's in it for them?" Kelly, who declined to comment for the story, initially believed, people close to him said, that Trump was making a ham-handed reference to the selflessness of America's all-volunteer force, but later he came to realize that Trump simply does not understand non-transactional life choices. It's like I love that idea that like even in the most even in the most benevolent reading of it, of like it's his really awkward way of paying tribute to the selflessness of his act is like. You could not come up with a worse thing to say to the father of a dead son over his grave, just being like, what was in it for him? I don't get it.
And then he became his chief of staff after that. What a fucking cuck.
Absolutely.
Biggest cuck in the
not
world.
a man. Not a man.
Grub.
Not a man.
Grub creature.
No, well, I mean, just like now that he's been fired from that job, still won't go on the record and say this guy's an asshole.
You're
Like,
right.
that's the kind of person you're dealing with here.
That I don't
The office.
understand.
That's military mindset, man.
Yeah.
But
I mean, they've created a whole upper echelon of yes men, of like absolute room temperature IQ button pushers at the top of the military.
Right, which is why there's no worry about a coup.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have the imagination.
Yeah, no imagination.
The mental gymnastics you have to do to be like, oh, actually, he meant it as a compliment. It's like battered wife syndrome.
Yeah.
It's horrifying.
Because none of the aristocrats are in the military anymore. It's just middle class drivership now, and aristocrats are kind of the only Americans who aren't beaten down. Like, if Mitt Romney's son died in, like, I don't know, whatever they do, some
dressage accident.
Dressage accident, ski jump. Do you think
Water polo.
Do you think he would take this from Trump? He would cast a spell on him. He would put on the special underwear and cast a spell on him and curse him. But just like a guy like Kelly, I just have to respect the president. No, nothing.
They're just yes men. That's how you get that job.
Yeah,
a lifetime of kissing ass.
And you're just a fucking this is the sort of person who pickup artist techniques work on. Like nagging works on. Like you have such a simple fucking mind that you're like, well, thank you. Like when someone is saying something horrible to you.
You can't even really get mad at Trump for saying this is just that's how he sees the world. He's the best thing he could say to you, and under any interpretation is your son got a really bad deal.
Yeah.
I wish your son had a better. Your son was hot. I wish I was his agent.
Yeah, so tall.
Yeah, but it's
Amber.
the real villain of this story is Kelly. What a fucking pussy! Imagine you die. That kid fucking enlisted to impress his dad. John Kelly was just a fucking old withholding piece of shit, and you fucking die in his dumb fucking war.
Yeah,
and this fucking slob is your son made one of the worst deals of all time by dying, and you're like, yes sir, I'll serve for you. What a fucking pussy.
This is literally more cucked than DeBunglio being like, but I love the police after they fucking arrest his daughter. It's you are a fucking I'm at this point you start to feel a little conservative because it's you are not a man. You become an old fucking Italian widow.
You call yourself
that's how
a
I
man.
feel in this. This makes the bungalow look like fucking Tony Soprano.
Amber, to your point about this is the type
disgusting worm. Yeah. That's your child.
What a fucking loser. What a loser. And what did you get out of it? You get to consult for Dracula Associates.
Yeah, you got to have him spitting fucking KFC breading into your face for 2 years before he fires you and calls you a loser in front of the entire President of the United States, calling you a
and
fucking
he'll take
loser.
it. He'll
and then you
take
just
it.
go off, and you become some Raytheon desk filler.
Yeah, if I was writing The Atlantic, the cover story would be the biggest bitch in America. And it would be a black and white picture of John Kelly.
Give Felix a column in The Atlantic.
Amber, to your point though about how this is the type of brain that negging works on. I'm imagining Trump standing with John Kelly over his son's grave and just negging him by going, "Your son's grave looks pretty good, but here in Arlington, I've seen a lot of other ones that look just like it."
Doesn't have any flash.
All right, this next part is a section that I really liked. Just picking it out here, it says, yet another related explanation concerns what appears to be Trump's pathological fear of appearing to look like a sucker himself. His capacious definition of sucker includes those who lose their lives in service to their country, as well as those who are taken prisoner or are wounded in battle. Quote, he has a lot of fear, one officer with firsthand knowledge of Trump's views said. He doesn't see the heroism in fighting. Several observers told me that Trump is deeply anxious about dying or being disfigured, and this worry manifests itself as a disgust for those who have suffered. Whom amongst us does not have a similar fear of dying or being disfigured?
This made me think of a version of Johnny Got His Gun where it's Donald Trump. And the message he's banging out with his head in Morse code is the Graydon Carter tweet over and over again. He's saying that his Oscar party is a flop.
Yeah, it's not that he's afraid of dying or being disfigured. Everybody is, as you said. The thing is that for some people, there's a force greater than their fear that can compel them. It's often coercion. In our army, it's largely economic coercion, but it can also be a principle, a good one or a bad one. But he doesn't have any of that. He can't be coerced, and he sure as shit would never sacrifice himself for any concept or other person. So for him, it is nonsensical.
I think it's also interesting that he uses the word heroism here, which is a very specific kind of romantic individualist word. And he doesn't use the word like duty or responsibility or, should you be called to violent action, and you're not a pacifist, but you you don't want to go to war, but you say, like, this is the just situation which I would intervene. I would hope that you would go into it thinking, I have a responsibility, I have a duty to mankind, to blah, 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 blah. I would hope that you wouldn't think, I'm going to be a fucking hero. Because that's, like, just how you end up with, like, the My Lai massacre.
Yes, it's exactly how.
Yeah, and it just shows
Captain
Trump's
America.
genius. Because he just recognizes that there's nothing in the American empire. There's no fucking defense. It's just going on expeditionary missions around the world, right? There's no Ernst Jünger type of storm of steel heroism in sort of maintaining the outposts of empire. And I think Trump, like on his, deranged level, understands that in a way that John Kelly doesn't.
Well, speaking of that today, so you guys might not know this yet. It happened today. Trump was being interviewed. And this is him dropping another thing that you're supposed to keep to yourself, that all the people in power know and don't believe, but mouth to everyone else to keep them fighting. Today he said, I'm not saying the military's in love with me. The soldiers are. The top people in the Pentagon probably aren't, because they want to do nothing but fight wars so that all those wonderful companies that make the bombs and make the planes and make everything else stay happy. He's doing Smedley Butler now.
He's doing Donald
he knows
Sutherland's
this
monologue from JFK.
This gets to the heart of why liberals hate him, because he is breaking fucking kayfabe. He is saying stuff that they all know, but that you cannot generalize, because that will disinvest any sort of like social legitimacy to fucking government, which we need to keep it going.
Right.
He's almost
he's
like-
on a vestigial level here. I think he understands that these things are unpopular, but he also has been dead set for 4 years now on selling as much hardware to as many countries as possible to keep those same companies happy. I mean, it's not like
Yeah.
Well, that's
he's
the thing. It's like
abandoning
he's like a
the
deal. He
defense
just doesn't
contractors.
think it's a good deal. It's
Right,
like, you sell
right.
the weapons, you don't use them, idiot.
Did you guys ever watch the somewhat maligned Terry Gilliam movie, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so when they have Vulcan, they imagine him as basically an arms dealer, and he's the god of fire, and his final sort of monologue that he gives is that, like, well, we're going to make a thing where you just press a button and it goes all the way to the other side of the world and it kills a bunch of people. And, the little girl protagonist, like, that's horrible. He's like, yes, but then you don't have to see a single person die. And I think, like, it's a pretty, like, heavy-handed but really, like, prescient idea of, like, the sense of, like, technology becoming a business of mass murder that you don't have to pay attention to, that you can ignore, that is tidy, that doesn't weigh on your conscience. And I think about it all the time, because it's like, the movie's like from the 80s or something, and it's like, God, it's become so efficient. It's become so fucking efficient that at this point you think of, like, dead soldiers. It almost seems insane. Half the time they're just playing video games.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Amber, that people have been arguing that from the 1930s. Like, this is the dream of liberal warfare. Like, the national security state is a liberal institution. And I have a piece coming out on this in Jacobin, but one of the things that they wanted to do was exactly that, was to make war progressive. And they literally used that language by making it more efficient and humane. I mean, the sickest example of that was that after they dropped the atomic bomb, Loris Norstad is like, this is a precision weapon. We killed a city in one bomb. That's amazing. Like, we made war more efficient and even more humane. And I think the apotheosis of that is like the drone strike, right? The video game drone strike, where you don't even have to, like, confront your enemy. You could just kill them with a button push, and therefore that's the progressive, humane, efficient, economical way of fighting war. And that's totally the American way of war. It's supposed to be.
Well, and I think too, like, there's been I didn't know it went back that far, but there's been a fear of, like, the sort of, like, technologically advanced war, and about how that's almost a distraction. It's almost a technocratic approach to it. Remember when everyone was, like, terrified of, like, stealth missiles, and they thought that was going to dehumanize the whole conflict, and there was this whole moral conundrum, and the issue was that, like, the technology was too efficient. We were too distant from it. And it's almost like, for a few years ago, when people first started getting obsessed with drones and drone strikes, it's almost like the actual technology became a distraction from like, well, we need to not have the war, regardless of what Lego set we're using to do it. But the technology is almost so like baffling and horrifying and dehumanizing, and we have no context for it. The way we don't have a million movies of the way we have people sitting in foxholes or running through jungles. So it's like, I don't know. It's just like this weird thing where it's hard at this point for us to even wrap our heads around what would be an anti-war movement, what would be an anti-imperialism movement, because the technology itself is so horrifying that it distracts from the actual politics that undergird it.
No, I think that's right. And actually, all of this is a response, just to get back to World War I. It's all a response to World War I. The idea is that you'd be able to fly over your enemy's troops. You'd be able to fly over the Western Front and bomb Germany and end the war, in a day, right? And so this is the dream. And even though it never fucking works out that way, this is still how military people talk about ending wars. They talk about ending wars in one strike. And so there's this whole mystification around how Americans could fight wars that is just totally, completely ridiculous. And Trump, again, is like just underlining the absurdity of the logic of the system. And I think that's why people like him.
Well, Daniel, actually, I want to just shift gears just really quickly at the end here, and I do want to talk about a piece that you just wrote for Foreign Exchanges about American empire and its sort of endless search for enemies to justify itself, or it's this self-fulfilling prophecy of empire, and it's just like it's a pretty broad view of it. But there's one element of it that I wanted to bring up because it's something I've been thinking about recently, and you talk about how obviously World War I. We've established pretty much there were no good guys in that. I mean, it was just a wholesale slaughter for basically equally evil competing empires. World War II is the example that everyone has of like the one fucking time that the U.S. military was used in a way where you could make some argument historically or morally that it was like necessary, or very simply speaking, we were the good guys. And I understand like it's...
And the Civil War.
Yeah, Civil War as well. But I mean like in terms of like...
Two good wars.
Yeah. And then obviously the Cold War following right after World War II. But the point you break up that I think it's an interesting one is how 9/11 and the War on Terror was like this huge gift to empire, the military-industrial complex, just like the American war-making ideology and self-mythology about it. But the interesting thing is, looking back on it now, how quickly it sputtered out, like the jihadist and radical Islam as this like global never-ending specter of evil that we have to remain constantly vigilant against and be like justify all these wars fighting. In the midst of the Bush administration, it seemed like that was this like immovable leviathan, like this was never going to go away. People were always going to be juiced up by this idea of like another 9/11 happening, and will justify any retaliation to prevent that. But looking back on it now, that really hasn't been the case, and they're trying to juice up China.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really interesting. We're all around the same age. If you guys remember in the 90s, there's this huge, like, Holocaust remembrance thing.
Yes.
And if you actually look at M. Grant, like, the Holocaust thing goes off the fucking charts, and you get Schindler's List, and you ultimately get Saving Private Ryan, which are basically justifying American empire, in my opinion. But what's really interesting is I think that's a reflection of the fact that the American empire, like, needed something to do in the 1990s. Right? Because the thing was, the idea was you don't need NATO anymore, right? There's no Soviet Union. You don't need to have these hundreds of bases. You don't need to spend so much on your military. And actually, military spending does go down for a little bit, but there's nevertheless a search for the enemy because the material structure remains in place. And you get this throughout the 1990s. Like the United States is going to like stop a future Rwanda. You get the interventions in Bosnia. You get the intervention in Kosovo, presumably for humanitarian reasons. But like Will was saying, with 9/11, it provides this like evil, this like very evil person, this very evil image of the jihadist, and you get like very explicit references to the Nazis. Like, do you guys remember Islamofascism?
Oh yeah,
like that was just
yeah.
So that's just like the Muslims are Nazis, right? But it was pretty clear, I think, pretty quickly that there's not a serious threat posed by any Middle Eastern nation, not Iran or North Korea, or obviously not Middle East, but any nation, and let alone lone wolf terrorists. So you still see like this drift in American empire that is still happening, I think, now, and they're trying to reconcile it with this new Cold War with China. And you see like Max Boot and all the the old standbys come out in favor of this new Cold War because, and I want to emphasize this, a liberal empire needs an enemy, right? It's not like the Mongols where you're just going to conquer everything. It's liberal. It's like the British and the French. They need to have a civilizing mission. They need to have a liberal goal. The American empire needs to have a liberal goal. The problem, though, is that there's no such fucking thing as a liberal empire. I mean, there is, but they're just horribly evil, and you can't reconcile that. So you get, which is like the kayfabe that Matt was talking about now, where there's just no logic for this horrible, all-encompassing thing that is not only horrible, but it's destroying the environment by making it impossible to deal with fucking climate change. So it's like this horrible situation. Right.
Well, we just need green tanks, though. It'll be fine.
Yeah, do you remember that? That was
awesome.
that was the Warren plan.
Yep.
Was that there would be solar panels on fucking aircraft carriers.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
we're gonna send millions of tons of hunks of metal and gasoline-powered fucking airplanes that don't even work all around the world.
That's so advanced neoliberalism. That's
Yes.
like Israeli levels. That's like you
Yeah.
can have a vegan diet in the IDF.
But
Yeah, that was incredible. I mean, to what Daniel said, do you guys remember this, that during the insurgency, I feel like this is a great example of this. During the insurgency, when it became clear this wasn't the type of war that we thought it would be, yes, we rolled over the derelict Iraqi Republican Guard in a matter of weeks, but then the insurgency just ran us through the buzzsaw. The line from the Bush administration, from Condoleezza Rice specifically, was that, this actually happened in Germany post-war. This happened after
Yeah,
peace.
yeah,
Sure,
And, yeah, what she meant was there were like small groups of losers who tried to sabotage Reconstruction and try to abduct troops, and it was just so much piddlier than what we were dealing with.
Exactly.
But it was just another thing where it's like, no, this is the good war. This is the war that has a beginning and end that you can sink your teeth into.
Right.
It's this deranged thing because we never had an enemy after the Cold War until 9/11 that we could do anything that had any kind of romantic potential to it, that had a good storyline to it. And the problem with 9/11 is that eventually people, and you saw this in The Big Short when they were, or not in The Big Short, in Vice, when they were trying to figure out like how to sell the war to the public. They did like focus groups, and they're like, wait, but so is this a country? What country are we fighting? So it was like this very ephemeral thing, and people sort of lost attachment to it. They couldn't be like, oh, it's the fucking Ruskies, it's the fucking commies. Like, it's like we never had a moment where we had such a perfect enemy because they were powerful, they were impressive. We wouldn't have gotten to the moon without them. Like, essentially, we were dependent on them. They held our feet to the fire. And then after that, I feel like we've been scrambling ever since to find an ideological enemy and a national enemy like communism in the Soviet Union, and none of it makes any fucking sense. Like, remember when we tried Bosnia? And like, I remember being like, why are we in Bosnia? What's going on in Bosnia? And later on you learn about it, and it's just like, oh, holy shit, this was a clusterfuck. There's never been anything that we could do ever since.
Yeah, I mean, I think the attempt, as Daniel said earlier, the attempt in the 90s was to replace the enemy with another romantic story that the United States is going to go around the world spreading peace and freedom and harmony and democracy everywhere. And it just, it fizzled out because I think for Americans, that's an impossible case to make. I mean, for any population to tell them, our military is going to spend, from now until the end of time, just hopping around the world, engaging in these ill-defined missions to, spread sunshine and happiness all over the world. It's just impossible to sell. But when you get that enemy, and when 9/11 happened, and that you got that hook. I mean, you can see in the way that the multitude of ways that the Bush administration sold the Iraq War, that there was still some residual kind of sense of,
they had to make it the Iraq War. They couldn't just say, because it was so difficult for them to be like, so there are these terrorists. So they're like, well, why don't we just get them? Why do we have to have war on a country that, like, people, I think instinctively were kind of skeptical, and at least initially, of the idea that a bunch of fucking loonies stealing a goddamn plane and crashing it into was some kind of like state-sanctioned act.
Right. And there was a sort of smorgasbord of reasons for that war. Like, it was sort of choose your own justification. They have weapons of mass destruction. They were secretly supporting Al Qaeda. But if you're still hung up on the stuff we were doing, 5 or 10 years ago, also we're going to liberate the Iraqi people from Saddam's tyranny and spread democracy to the Middle East, and it's going to be like this beachhead of democracy.
The imperial feminism, or the genocide of the Kurds. They would try to at the end kind of tack on humanitarian stuff in there, and it's like, there are worse things than like wearing a veil, like being fucking bombed.
Well, and also, like, there was just total ignorance. Like, Americans had no idea that wearing the veil in a certain society might be actually participating in the public sphere as a woman, which is actually a progressive act. So there was just total ignorance there. But I think it's just important as a historian of the Cold War, the more we learn about the early Cold War, it was like so obviously driven by the United States. Like, Stalin did not want to fight a Cold War with the United States. It's very, very clear that they wanted to avoid that. And it's really, you see it from 45 onward, the Americans pushing more and more and more to fight this Cold War and creating a military-industrial complex, creating a military-intellectual complex, creating the national security state in 1947, the act which creates the CIA, the DOD, everything that we know now. They essentially justified a permanent mobilization of the World War II wartime economy for peacetime by virtue of the Soviet Union. And I think that the anti-communism was actually epiphenomenal to the American desire to control the world, which emerges from this Christian millenarianism, which precedes the founding of the country, which argues that the only way you're safe is if literally everyone in the world is like you. And so that is what, or dead or like you. And that is what they put that crazy ideology, this Christian millenarianism, onto Stalin and the Soviet Union. And they're trying to do the same fucking thing right now with China, which has no illusions about governing the world. That's only an insane American could possibly think that.
And also, like, it doesn't work as well. Like, I had this in the book. It's like, we miss our departed love, the Soviet Union. We're basically mourning for it because it was like a perfect ideological enemy. And yes, China looks lovely in red, but she's just not the same. It just doesn't work as well. And then
I think that's right.
It's the millenarian thing, and then later on, as kind of the ideological stuff, I think, became subsumed by a much more just like bloodless profit motive thing. The influence of the UK in the Cold War is totally understated, like to the point to where I think Thatcher was a more effective, more intelligent, not just because her brain wasn't pudding, more influential player in the Cold War towards the end than Reagan. The shit she did was amazing. That bitch was ruthless, and she was brilliant, and she believed in capitalism more than she believed in profit. She lost money in order to smash the miners. She called them like commies. She called them like she smeared the president of the union as a Stalinist. It was absolutely amazing. And I don't know if that shift happened because by the end, like, the U.S. was just sort of going on autopilot, but we kind of believed in it less, more broadly. I mean, in fighting the communist devils, I think we kind of believed in it less. We were just sort of on autopilot towards the end, and I think it was like Thatcher that brought it over the line in the end.
I mean, absolutely. Reagan meets with Gorbachev. I think the first term is different than the second term, but in the second term, Reagan was way more conciliatory than Thatcher ever was. Total. I think that's totally right.
Gorbachev said this in the thing. He's like, I could work with Reagan. He was like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't all have nuclear weapons. He's like, Thatcher, though, I could not work with that woman. She was just a fucking ruthless bitch. He didn't say that. He's a gentleman, Gorbachev. But it was just, it's this insane thing where it's like the project took on a mind of its own, and it stopped even having like an ideological base that you could say out loud. It went from belief to ideology over the course of one generation, maybe.
I just like and just to wrap things up here in terms of like casting the new enemy for the American empire, and like I you brought up Max Boot. Is China is clearly who they're trying to cast now in this new Cold War, And I think people forget, like, up until basically Monday, September 10th, 2001, most of those like real like neocon guys, obviously they had long been planning for Iraq and Iran, but like their whole ideology for like a 21st century American like military and economic hegemony was all about confronting China. And then they just changed that on Tuesday morning. But now, like, you better believe all those plans, all those ideas are like the papers have already been written. And I guess just for to close things out with Daniel and Derek, like, how do you see China being fit into this new Cold War? Like, you know, how do you see, like, in terms of like the defense intellectual complex, like what they're trying to do with China now? How do you see that going forward?
Well, I guess, Derek, I'll go first. I mean, I think briefly, you have to recognize that a lot of people who are still making a lot of policies were today like trained in Soviet studies. Like people like Condoleezza Rice and Bob Gates are literally Soviet specialists. So they're, I mean, even though they're not in power, but a lot of people under them as well. So they're a lot of times they're actually using a framework developed to understand the Soviet Union, and they're placing it on China. So that's the first thing. I think that the thing that people generally point to is the fact that the U.S. and Chinese economies are much more intertwined than the U.S. and Soviet economies ever were, right? So there's a hard capitalist limit to some degree with regards to what you're going to be able to do with them. So what I see happening is that I think that like lobbyists of the military-industrial complex, remember defense contractors spent $120 million on lobbying, like way more than any peace organization, but also people associated with what like I term the military intellectual complex, like people who basically make their money off of thinking about U.S. war and U.S. empire, people like Max Boot, but also people in think tanks. What I think these two groups want is to essentially fight a Cold War with China that never goes hot, that never goes proxy war, that never does things like that. Remember, of course, during the Cold War, the U.S. tried to overthrow regimes covertly 66 times, and in 44 of those cases supported authoritarian regimes. And I think there's like a general recognition that they don't want that again. So what essentially they want, and Derek, I'm curious what you think, they want a structure of a Cold War with China without the actual fighting of the Cold War with China, which I think is ridiculous and clearly impossible and will result in a lot of death and a lot of money spent. And also, more importantly for me, moving resources from butter to guns, like moving things that could go to a social welfare state to fight a lot of pointless wars with China.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of dimensions to this. And you know, one of the ones that's stuck out to me most recently is, you know, they're trying so hard to make the case that China is an existential threat to the United States. And to some extent, the Chinese government is not playing the game that I think a lot of people in the U.S. want it to play. And you can see that most clearly in this effort to basically just manufacture and like invisible nuclear stockpile that China has like hidden underground that doesn't exist. You know, the best, you know, most estimates of China's nuclear stockpile put it in like the 200s, maybe in, you know, up into the 300s, which is a fraction of what the United States has. But you will have people, even as they, you know, the Pentagon just put out a new report said, you know, we assess that they have it's somewhere in the 200s in terms of the number of warheads, but they're going to double that in, you know, the next 10 years. There's no evidence that they're actually going to do that, but this is like, you know, manufacturing a threat that's much greater than the one that actually exists. I also think, I mean, part of me thinks, you know, part of the resistance on the, you know, when you talk about people like Max Boot and the sort of national security Republicans who have become never Trumpers, like this, the pandemic, could have been a godsend for these guys in terms of, you know, making a real strong push, you know, anti-China. Like you got to, you know, cut business, stop doing business with these guys and divest from China and, you know, get away from this stuff because look how unsafe they are. And they're, you know, there's this huge danger. But Trump fucked up our response so badly that the story has instead become, you know, how badly mismanaged it's been. And I feel like, you know, on some level, there's a missed opportunity for those guys to kind of add the pandemic to a litany of sort of manufactured grievances against China.
But just one quick thing. I think that we are going to see, and actually Felix, I'm curious what you think about this. If we'll see more confrontations in East Asia, because I think that China is going to try to push the United States out of East Asia. The U.S. will not maintain regional hegemony there forever. So my prediction is that in the next 25-ish years, there's going to be increasing confrontations between China and the U.S. in that region. That could actually get pretty serious if the United States maintains the fantasy of trying to be the global hegemon in every region at every moment for all time.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see the future of what type of president we would have. I think if we had like a President Cotton or like a President Rubio or even a lot of Democratic choices, what was said about the impossibility of fighting the framework of a Cold War without it ever even approaching medium temperature is totally true. Somewhere along the line, that dam is going to break.
Exactly.
I feel like if we had a liberal interventionist president who's at the Samantha Power School, or which is pretty much every Democrat, or a more standard Republican, you're going to see a troop buildup that's made to get some good news cycles, some good headlines. You're going to get what happens whenever you have like a border confrontation or something like that. And I think you'd at least get a fucking proxy war. I'm definitely not an expert in East Asia, but I think just even now, even stretched to our limit now, even with Trump being as disinterested as he is with these types of wars, the amount of like small confrontations, not killing each other, but ships losing track of where they go, ships getting lost, shit like that, I think it's bound to happen unless we pull back. I mean, what's unfortunate is, and what's infuriating is the Samantha Powers people, the people who talk about being pragmatic, of doing good in the world under this realistic framework. They don't seem to realize that our trend line's not very good, that we're stretched quite thin, and increasing our presence anywhere now is insane. It's the most insane fucking crackpot thing you could do. We ran out of sanitary wipes as a country. You're gonna contest East Asian territorial waters? What the fuck is wrong with you? It's as crackpot as anything the Trump people say or any of those Brexit psychos say about creating a new Anglosphere. It's as insane as those nationalist Turks we make fun of on Twitter who are like, we're gonna take Vienna. It's maybe more insane. And I think, we're in the next 30 years, unless there's some pullback, unless there is someone who, like a Bernie, recognizes that this is coming to an end and we need to negotiate our exit from the world, we are due for something very tragic.
I think to your point, Felix, one of the things that's going to be interesting to see, if Biden is elected, I mean, we sort of know how Trump approaches this stuff, but if Biden is elected and then beyond that, whatever monster slouches toward Washington at that point, it's going to be interesting to see how the U.S. approaches India, because I do think India has become the sort of the proxy that we want to develop to take on China. It's another large country, potentially could be economically much stronger than it is. They've already started having some border clashes with China, and the border, I mean, that border is tailor-made for a fight because it's so badly defined pretty much all the way across that it's kind of the perfect excuse for some kind of a clash. So I think that's going to be interesting to see where the U.S.-India relationship goes.
And you see China is very much aligning with Pakistan right now, right? They're trying to encircle India.
Yeah.
And you see, and I was just in India in December, and there's so much pro-U.S. stuff. It's incredible. So I think you're actually, the way that I frame it to my students is that we're seeing the first post-Cold War alliance system emerge, right? Where you get India and Israel allying with each other in meaningful ways. And you get capital transfers and weapons transfers right now. And I think that's what China's doing. I think if I had to guess what Xi is thinking, he's like, in 30 years, we're going to push the United States out of the Eastern Hemisphere to whatever degree is possible. And that would be my guess of what his grand ambition is.
See, you guys were all so pro. You guys were all so pro Marianne Williamson. But what did I say? We would immediately declare war on Pakistan for making yoga illegal.
There's I would sort of equate, coming full circle here, what a World War I type, pre-World War I type setup we have here. Because, yeah, you mentioned that India is incredibly aligned with America and very aligned with Israel. I mean, Yair Netanyahu actually had to apologize, I think, for posting a picture of Vishnu because that alliance is so important. But China also sells a ridiculous amount of arms to Israel. We have these horribly Byzantine interconnected weapon sales systems that, you see things like Russia selling S-400s to both sides of the Azerbaijani and Armenian conflict. That, this is more complicated and more alarming and has greater potential for disaster than the system of cousins that the world worked on before.
Yeah, and I think that just shows, just very quickly, I just think that shows how we as the left need to be more sophisticated analytically in how we connect nationally oriented military power and control of violence to international, transnational capitalism. I think that's actually a really important analytical thing to do, and it's actually really difficult because, like Felix was saying, there's all these strange relationships at subnational levels which are also connected to the government, but the military is a national institution, but to what degree is it really? It's relying so much on private mercenaries. So I think it's actually really significant lacuna in the left's thinking about geopolitics.
And I would add to that alliance system. I would say, you've got to talk about the Gulf states as well that are now kind of making common cause with Israel. You've got Saudi Arabia investing billions of dollars in India to such an extent that its relationship with Pakistan is now in tatters because the Saudis won't criticize what's happening in Kashmir. So it's yeah. I mean, I think that we've got a big web of new alliances forming that you have to wait and see how they're all going to rub up against one another.
I think that is a good place to wrap it up for this episode. Derek and Daniel, I want to thank you guys so much for joining us. Derek and Daniel, if people want to read more of your stuff, where can they find it?
Daniel's first piece, which what we've been talking about here at Foreign Exchanges, just went up today. It's called The American Empire and Existential Enemies. He's going to be writing at FX for a piece a month for hopefully indefinitely. I hope people will subscribe and support this effort so we can keep doing this. The website is fx.substack.com. Come check it out. Check out Daniel's piece and the other stuff that we're doing there and subscribe.
I think fans of the show will know that since day one, we have always supported the work of Derek Davison and the FX Network. Please rehire Kurt Sutter, Derek. I mean, he's I know he's had some difficulties with work environment in the past, but I mean, come on, he's a genius. Give him another show, please.
I'll see what I can do. I can't make any promises here.
I cannot recommend Foreign Exchanges enough. I'm really excited to see the addition of Daniel to it. It's I think it's the best foreign policy newsletter you can read. I recommend that everyone hearing that subscribes. It's a great one-stop shop. You feel like the president. You're getting a daily briefing. Not daily, but you're getting a briefing.
Once again, Derek and Daniel, thank you so much for stopping by. Happy Labor Day to all of you guys. Respect and love to all.